Single dad waiter stands up to billionaire CEO. What he says next freezes the entire internet. I don't serve people who don't know what they're really hungry for. The words weren't shouted, they weren't even sharp, but they sliced through the air with the precision of a blade honed by too many years of swallowing silence. A hush fell over the dining room of Kingsley's Manhattan's most exclusive modern American steakhouse, where forks usually moved with symphonic grace and the hum of wealth was the background music. But now that hum had vanished, replaced by the brittle sound of one sentence hanging in the air like a gauntlet. Jack Reynolds stood tall, not aggressively, not defensively, but like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything left to protect. His black apron was pressed, his white shirt immaculate. In one hand he held a bottle of wine meant for table 8. In the other, the shattered remains of someone else's patience. Across from him sat Elizabeth Morgan, queen of medical technology, her expression an ice sculpture just beginning to crack. Her tone moments before had been venomous, slicing into a young server who'd mispronounced the name of a French dish. "Excuse me," she had snapped, loud enough for surrounding tables to hear. "If you can't speak with precision, why are you speaking at all?" The boy, no older than 20, had turned a shade too pale for his age. He stammered, tried to recover, and then fled. Jack had seen it happen dozens of times in a dozen restaurants. Power used like a fist. But tonight, something in him snapped, and he stepped forward. Now Elizabeth was staring at him with eyes that could probably freeze lava. "I didn't ask for your opinion," she said, voice like glass. "No," Jack replied calmly. "You asked for respect without offering any in return." The entire restaurant had fallen under a spell, the kind only real tension can conjure. A man at the next table lowered his napkin. A woman by the window put down her wine. Even the pianist in the corner let his fingers slip off the keys, holding his breath like the rest of them. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, assessing Jack like a lion studies an unfamiliar rival. "You must think this is brave," she said, making a scene. "Getting your 15 seconds of fame." Jack didn't flinch. "I think real bravery," he said, "isn't measured by volume. It's measured by silence, how long someone like that kid can take it before someone else decides enough is enough." Her jaw flexed. The room watched wide-eyed. Then with the slow poise of someone used to controlling a courtroom, even if this one was wrapped in candlelight, Elizabeth waved a dismissive hand. "Bring me the Wagyu filet medium rare and a new server." Jack didn't move. "No." Her voice rose, not loud but electric. "Is that how Kingsley's trains its staff now? To pick and choose which guests they want to serve?" "I'm not refusing to serve you," he said. "I'm refusing to serve your anger." Somewhere in the back, a phone buzzed. A lens flickered. Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, someone had already started recording. She stared at him. "What's your name, Jack? I'll make sure you're not here tomorrow." He nodded without fear, without bravado. "You do what you need to. I already did." With that, he turned and walked back toward the kitchen, past the other servers, who parted like waves. His heart thudded in his chest, not from fear, but from release, like finally saying something you'd rehearsed your whole life without realizing it. In the kitchen, Barbara Thompson, the owner and general manager, was already waiting. Her arms were crossed, her jaw set in that dangerous way mothers got when they were about to defend you or bury you. "What happened?" Her tone wasn't a question. It was a fuse. Jack handed off the bottle he was holding. "She humiliated Ethan publicly. I wasn't going to let that slide." Barbara exhaled through her nose. "That's Elizabeth Morgan, Jack. Do you know how many zeros she's worth? Do you know how many investors she dines here with? How many influencers follow her charity foundation on Instagram?" He leaned on the prep counter, grounding himself. "I know I didn't sign up to be her punching bag. She'll make calls to the owner to Yelp to God if she thinks it'll help. I'm not saying you were wrong. I'm saying you picked a battle with a woman who doesn't lose." Jack met her eyes. "I'm raising a daughter. I don't want her to grow up thinking money gives you the right to humiliate people." That stopped Barbara for half a second. The part of her that was manager flared with dread. The part of her that had once been a waitress in a cheap diner nodded, slowly remembering. "I'll talk to her," she said, "but Jack, be ready for fallout." Later that night, the buzz began. The video of the confrontation was clipped, edited, and hashtagged. Within hours, it was on TikTok, Reddit, and Instagram. Waiter tells off billionaire CEO in Manhattan steakhouse. He didn't take her order. He took a stand. Some called him a hero. Others called him unprofessional. The comment section became a battlefield between corporate apologists and hospitality veterans. Jack didn't read it. He was too busy washing Sophie's dishes, helping her finish a diorama of the Apollo 11 lunar module, and brushing her teeth while she told him a story about a class hamster named Button. Only after she was asleep, her tiny hands still clutching his shirt, did he check his phone. There it was. Dozens of texts, missed calls, emails from reporters he didn't know, and people he hadn't spoken to since his deployment. And one message from an unknown number. You think you're noble. You're not. Enjoy the attention while it lasts. Jack stared at it for a long moment. Then he locked his phone, placed it face down on the nightstand, and whispered into the dark, I didn't want attention. I just wanted her to see herself. And somewhere in the concrete labyrinth of Manhattan, Elizabeth Morgan stared out the window of her penthouse suite, rewatching the video, trying to understand what exactly had just cracked open inside her. Is he fired yet? Elizabeth's voice cut through the silence of the glass conference room like ice breaking on a winter lake. Across the table, her legal counsel, her publicist, and her VP of operations exchanged glances. Each one silently nominating someone else to speak first. No one dared. She was tired, not just physically, not just from the jet lag of a red-eye trip to San Francisco to meet with restless investors. She was tired in her marrow, the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting on too many fronts for too many years. The video had been sent to her before she even boarded the plane back. A single minute and 12 seconds. A waiter calm as rain refusing to be steamrolled. Her own voice sharp and clipped, unmistakably cruel. She watched it once, then again, then again. It wasn't just that the internet was erupting. She could handle that. She had weathered media storms before. But this was different. She wasn't being criticized for a failed product launch or an internal leak. This was her exposed, stripped of polish, caught in a moment where something in her cracked and the world saw through. Her publicist finally broke the silence. Elizabeth, it's not great. The video's been reposted over 2 million times in 24 hours. The hashtag #StandAgainstPower is trending on 4 platforms. There's even a remix with trap music and a merch line. Elizabeth didn't blink. And we suggest issuing a controlled statement. Apologize for the incident. Take responsibility and frame it as stress under pressure. Humanize the situation. Maybe mention your foundation work. I don't have a foundation. We could start one, her assistant chimed in too eagerly. Elizabeth turned to her VP of Ops. Nick Haynes leaned back, threading his fingers together. Always the smooth one, always prepared, the kind of man who'd smile at a funeral and walk out with the will. It's a blip, he said, but it came at a bad time. With the IPO so close, the board is jumpy. Investors are nervous. If this lingers, they might demand a leadership statement or change. Elizabeth narrowed her eyes. You mean my leadership? Nick offered a diplomatic shrug. Who are you? It's politics optics. You built this company from nothing. But perception drives valuation. And right now, you're the woman who made a server a hero by being a villain. She hated how easily he said that. Hated that it wasn't even wrong. But more than that, she hated that she couldn't stop thinking about what that man Jack had said. I'm refusing to serve your anger. Not your order, not your tone. Your anger. He'd named it, laid it bare in front of the world. And she hadn't had a single word to follow it up with. Back in the South Side, Jack sat at the kitchen table long after Sophie had gone to bed. The dinner dishes were done, homework, packed lunch prepped for tomorrow. The quiet was a strange luxury, something most single parents didn't get enough of. He stared at his phone again, scrolling past articles, memes, a clip of him with subtitles in Spanish. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt exposed. He hadn't meant to go viral, hadn't meant to challenge power. He just couldn't stand by and let that kid be torn apart by someone who clearly had a storm going on inside her. He sipped lukewarm coffee and muttered, one sentence. That's all it took to burn down the quiet. A message pinged. This time not from a stranger. It was from Barbara. Come in an hour early tomorrow. We need to talk. Bring your apron just in case. Just in case, he repeated aloud. That was code for your fate isn't sealed yet. The next day, Jack walked into Kingsley's with his head high, but his gut twisted. Barbara met him in the back office, closing the door behind her. She looked tired, more so than usual. "You're still here," she said. "So that's something." Jack gave a tired smile. "Not a glowing endorsement, but I'll take it." She didn't smile back. "I had a call from Elizabeth Morgan's people. She didn't demand you be fired, didn't threaten to sue, just said she'd be watching the way we manage reputational risk moving forward, which in rich person speak is code for I'm not done with you. So you are firing me?" "No," she said, "because I watched that video too, and you didn't scream, you didn't shame, you held a line the rest of us forgot was there." A beat, then her voice softened. "She was brutal, but you didn't hit back. You offered a mirror." Jack looked away. Didn't feel noble. "It rarely does," she said, "but it was, and people felt it." He nodded. "So what now?" Barbara leaned in, elbows on the desk. "Now you keep doing your job. But be ready. This story isn't done. She'll come back. Women like that don't like leaving loose ends." Jack paused. She looked like someone who hasn't cried in years. Barbara raised an eyebrow. "You planning to fix her?" He shook his head slowly. "I think she's already cracked." That night, Elizabeth stood at the window of her penthouse overlooking the Manhattan skyline, bright, unbothered, and different. She had turned down interviews, ignored PR drafts, let calls go to voicemail. Instead, she rewatched the video again. Not her part, not the tirade, just him. That calm voice, that steady gaze, that one line that refused to serve her anger. It wasn't what he said that haunted her. It was why it hit so hard. Because deep down in a place she hadn't let light touch in years, she knew he was right. The storm didn't come with thunder. It arrived in heels. Elizabeth Morgan stepped through the entrance of Kingsley's on a Tuesday evening, the kind of night where the city felt hushed and thoughtful. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the rhythm of someone who was used to owning rooms and knew how to reclaim one she'd lost. Barbara spotted her instantly from across the bar and stiffened. The maitre d' swallowed hard, glancing around for Jack. Elizabeth didn't announce herself. She didn't bring security assistance or the usual armor of influence. Just a structured navy coat, a tight ponytail, and eyes that could still cut glass. "I'd like a table," she said, voice calm, measured. "For how many?" the maitre d' asked cautiously. "One," she replied, then added, "and if he's working, I'd like Jack to serve me." In the kitchen, Jack had just plated a sea bass when Barbara poked her head in. "She's back," she said. He didn't need to ask who. "She asked for you," she added. He didn't flinch. He simply wiped his hands, straightened his apron, and said, "Table number." She was already seated when he arrived, reading the menu with a faint air of detachment, like the food was a formality. "Good evening," Jack said quietly. Elizabeth looked up from the menu, lowering it slowly. For a heartbeat, their eyes locked. No cameras, no audience, just two people standing in the wreckage of a viral moment neither of them had expected. "Good evening," she echoed. Jack waited. She didn't speak, didn't apologize. Just closed the menu with the finality of someone making a choice. "I'll have the filet mignon medium rare. No substitutions," she said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "and a glass of whatever red wine you'd recommend. I trust your judgment." He raised an eyebrow slightly. "Do you?" Elizabeth didn't smile, but something behind her eyes flickered. "Let's call it an experiment." He nodded and stepped away. When he returned, she was no longer looking at her phone or the menu. She was watching the room. "Busy night," she said as he poured the wine. "Always," Jack replied. "People still eat even when the internet's on fire." She took a sip, then almost reluctantly, "I didn't come here to argue." "I didn't think you did." She studied him. "You're calm." "Still," he offered a faint smile. "Stillness isn't the absence of fire. It's knowing where to set it." That made her pause. She set down her glass fingers, brushing the stem. "You said something the other night about not serving my anger." "I did." She leaned forward, elbows on the white tablecloth. "You could have embarrassed me, escalated, said something cruel, but you didn't." "Why pue?" Jack met her gaze. "Because I've been on the other side of that table, and I've been the one holding the anger. Neither side feels good, but only one of them gets to choose what happens next." Elizabeth let those words settle. The kind of silence between them wasn't awkward. It was earn the quiet that follows after two people decide not to hide anymore. She exhaled, then looked down at her napkin. "I wasn't always like that," she said quietly. The woman in that video. I built everything by being harder than what tried to break me. Somewhere along the way, I think I froze over. Jack didn't interrupt, didn't rush to reassure her. He simply listened, and in that she found something far rarer than forgiveness, respect. I grew up in foster care, she continued, surprising even herself. Learned early that people listen to money, not pain. So I chased one to silence the other. I thought it was working until you didn't flinch. She looked up at him again. Why didn't you? Jack took a breath. Because I wasn't seeing a monster. I was seeing a mirror. And sometimes the only way to break a pattern is to not react to it. Elizabeth blinked, caught off guard. You always talk like that. He chuckled softly. Only on Tuesdays. Their conversation paused as the food arrived. Jack placed her steak gently before her, noting she didn't reach for her phone to photograph it. Another surprise. She took a bite, chewed thoughtfully. Perfect, she said. He gave a simple nod and turned to walk away, but she called after him softly. Jack, he stopped. I don't want to be that woman again, she said, the one who walks in and leaves ruin behind. He turned halfway, his voice low and even. Then don't. Simple, unadorned, but it struck her like thunder. She finished her meal in near silence, only asking for water once. No complaints, no condescension, just presence. When she stood to leave, she reached for her bag, then paused. How much is the check? It's on the house, Jack replied without hesitation. Elizabeth's brows lifted. I don't need charity. It's not charity, he said. It's gratitude for the quiet and for trying. She hesitated, then pulled a $100 bill from her wallet and slid it beneath her empty wine glass. For the server who didn't flinch, Ochi, she said, and the man who didn't look away. Before he could respond, she was gone. Later, as Jack wiped down the table, Barbara appeared beside him, arms crossed. Well, she didn't throw anything, Jack said dryly. She coming back? I think she already did, he replied quietly. Across the city, Elizabeth Morgan stood in front of her bathroom mirror. She removed her earrings slowly, watching her own reflection as if meeting it for the first time in a long while. She didn't know what she was walking toward, but for the first time she knew she had stopped running from herself. And maybe, just maybe, that was how real change began. Not with a statement, not with a press release, but with a conversation. A quiet one, the kind that didn't demand to be heard, only understood. The fall wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost forgettable. A quick trip on the last rung of a jungle gym, the kind of misstep any child might make on a spring afternoon. But to Elizabeth Morgan, standing in Central Park in heels she had no business wearing on mulch, it felt like the world slowed down just enough for her to realize she wasn't just watching someone else's daughter stumble. She was watching a version of herself fall, and this time she had the chance to catch her. Careful, she called out, rushing forward, her coat flaring behind her like a cape that didn't belong to any superhero she'd ever been. The little girl, brown-haired, wide-eyed, maybe 6 or 7, had caught herself with both palms on the ground, knees, scuffed lip trembling. A tear was forming, but hadn't yet dropped. Pride was holding it hostage. Hey, Elizabeth said softly, kneeling down beside her. You okay? The girl looked up, blinking. I'm fine, I'm tough. Elizabeth smiled. Of course you are, but even tough kids get hugged sometimes. The girl hesitated, then threw her arms around Elizabeth's neck without warning, burying her face in her shoulder. That was the moment Jack Reynolds came jogging around the bend, coffee in one hand, small tote bag of snacks in the other. He stopped cold when he saw them, his daughter in Elizabeth Morgan's arms. Sophie, he called, more breath than voice. Sophie turned still, gripping Elizabeth's coat. Hi, Daddy. I slipped. She helped me. Jack approached cautiously, his eyes scanning for signs of injury before landing on Elizabeth's face. You always hang out in playgrounds during the week, he asked, half-guarded. Elizabeth rose slowly, brushing mulch from her knees. Not usually. I was walking through. Fresh air therapy, or so my assistant insisted. She straightened her coat, suddenly looking out of place in the casual park setting. And you just happened to catch my kid mid-tumble. Elizabeth looked at Sophie, who had resumed climbing the structure, as if nothing had happened. She reminds me of someone, she said quietly. Jack followed her gaze. Me? No, she said. Someone I wanted to be. There was a pause, the kind that opens doors if you let it. Jack gestured to a bench nearby. You're already here. Want to sit for a bit? They sat in the shade watching Sophie climb and swing with the wild joy of a child who trusts the ground will always catch her. Elizabeth watched too, her arms folded. I haven't been to a park since I was 15, she said. Why is that? She thought for a moment. Parks are where kids feel safe. I stopped feeling that way a long time ago. Jack said nothing, just sipped his coffee and waited. I was in and out of 6 homes by the time I was 11, she finally said. Bounced around like an overdue library book no one wanted to check out. I learned quick, be useful, be silent, be sharp. Jack nodded slowly. And build a fortress. She glanced at him. You say that like you've seen one before. I built one too. Not as tall maybe, but just as lonely. There was something in the way he said it, without pity, without performance, that made Elizabeth's breath catch. Like he wasn't trying to impress her or fix her. He just was. I used to be a teacher, he added. History 9th grade before everything changed. She tilted her head. What happened? He looked at Sophie. Life, wife got sick, bills piled up. I left the classroom, found shift work. Waiting tables let me be near her during chemo. After she passed, I never went back. Elizabeth blinked. You gave it all up? He shook his head. No, I traded it for her. He gestured toward Sophie. Not a loss, just a different kind of legacy. For the first time, Elizabeth had no comeback, no armor, no quip, just a silence that felt safe. Sophie came bounding over, cheeks flushed. Can we get ice cream, Daddy, please? Jack smiled. Only if you promise not to fall all the monkey bars again. I didn't fall, I slid with style, she declared. Elizabeth laughed. The sound surprised even her. You want to join us? Jack asked. Elizabeth blinked. For ice cream? Sure, you saved her from a scraped knee. You've earned at least a scoop. She hesitated. I have conference calls. They'll still be there, he said gently, but she won't be 6 forever. That line landed, soft but true. Elizabeth stood brushing off her coat. I haven't had ice cream in 5 years. Then you're overdue, Jack replied, rising. Sophie grabbed each of their hands, Elizabeth on the left, Jack on the right, and pulled them toward the cart like she'd done it 100 times. Elizabeth looked down at the small hand gripping hers and felt something shift, something quiet and terrifying and beautiful. Trust. It had been a long time. As they sat on a park bench with dripping cones and sticky fingers, Elizabeth looked over at Jack. Why are you like this? She asked. He raised an eyebrow. Like what? Kind, patient, steady. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. He thought about it. Maybe I lost the other shoe a long time ago. Now I just walk different. She stared at him. That might be the most poetic thing anyone's ever said to me over pistachio ice cream. He grinned. Don't give me too much credit. I'm usually more eloquent over coffee. She was about to respond, but Sophie interrupted, smearing chocolate on her chin. Miss Elizabeth? Yes. I think you should come to our pizza night on Friday. Daddy always burns the crust, but we pretend it's fancy. Elizabeth looked at Jack, startled. He shrugged. You're welcome if you want. She didn't answer right away, but she didn't say no. And that was more than enough. Later that evening, alone in her office with the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, Elizabeth found herself distracted from the quarterly reports. Her mind kept drifting back to the park bench, the ice cream, the small hand in hers. It had been so long since she'd experienced something so unscripted, so devoid of agenda. So long since she'd been Elizabeth, not CEO Morgan. Her phone chimed. A text from an unknown number, 1254, Lexington Ave, Apt 3B, 7 p.m. Friday. Bring wine if you want, but Sophie prefers root beer. She stared at the message. Jack Reynolds had her personal number. She hadn't given it to him. Had he searched for it? Had someone at the restaurant provided it? But the question faded behind a more pressing one. Was she really considering this pizza night with a waiter and his daughter? The very waiter who had challenged her in front of a room full of people, whose quiet courage had made her a viral villain. The old Elizabeth, the Elizabeth of just a week ago, would have deleted the message, maybe even blocked the number. But something had shifted in her, hairline fractures in the ice revealing glimpses of who she used to be. Before the foster homes, before the armor, before Medinova. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then with the same decisiveness that had built her empire, she typed, I'll be there. And I prefer root beer too. The boardroom didn't smell like home. It smelled like fear masked in eucalyptus diffusers and catered lunches sterile, curated, and entirely void of warmth. Elizabeth sat at the head of the table, posture straight, lips painted in a shade of unyielding control. Around her were 10 men and 2 women in tailored suits, their pens clicking like metronomes of passive aggression. The screen at the far end displayed the words, "No CEO ever wanted to see Q2 forecast revised downward." Nick Haynes, her ever-composed VP of Ops, cleared his throat. "There's no way to sugarcoat it. The viral video dented trust. Corporate clients are stalling deals. Brand sentiment dropped 23% in a week." Elizabeth didn't blink. "We don't run on sentiment. We run on solutions." "That may be," said Frank Donovan, the chairman of the board and former cardiac surgeon. His silver beard framed a face lined by decades of high-stakes decisions. "But we're weeks away from the IPO. Investors want a face they can trust. Right now, that face is controversial." There it was, said with a smile coated in honey but sharp enough to draw blood. "And there's the matter of the next-gen pacemaker complaints," added Robert Keller, the venture capitalist whose early investment had helped launch Medinova. The timing couldn't be worse. Elizabeth's heart pounded, not with fear, but with rage so precise it felt surgical. She had built this company from her kitchen table with nothing but blistered fingers and nights no one saw. And now a single moment, a single human moment, threatened to wipe it away. "The next-gen issue is being addressed," she said. "Our engineering team has identified the voltage fluctuation in the battery component. We're preparing a statement." "A statement?" Keller raised an eyebrow. "Elizabeth, we're looking at a potential class action. The FDA is asking questions. If this gets out before the IPO..." "What are you suggesting, Robert?" she interrupted. "That we hide a potential safety issue?" The room temperature seemed to drop a few degrees. "I'm suggesting we manage the situation with discretion," Keller replied smoothly. "Quiet recalls, targeted replacements, nothing that spooks the market." Elizabeth's jaw tightened. She knew what he was really saying: bury it. Protect the IPO, worry about the patients later. She stood slow and deliberate. "You want me to play soft, to apologize in a press statement crafted by a consultant who's never missed a meal. But what if I told you I'm already doing the work, the real work?" Frank's brow lifted. "Meaning I'm rebuilding trust," Elizabeth said. "Not with headlines, with human beings. One conversation at a time and one wall at a time. And as for next gen, we're going to issue a full recall. Today. Every device, every patient." Keller's face darkened. "That sounds lovely, Elizabeth. But Wall Street doesn't invest in feelings." "No," Elizabeth said, gaze unwavering. "But real people do, and I'm done building companies that forget the people behind them." The silence in the room wasn't hostile. It was stunned, and somewhere in that stillness, Elizabeth realized she wasn't defending herself. She was becoming herself. As the board members filed out, Frank Donovan lingered behind. The old surgeon studied her with eyes that had seen too many hearts exposed. "That waiter," he said quietly, "he got to you, didn't he?" Elizabeth gathered her papers, not meeting his gaze. "He reminded me of something I forgot." Frank nodded slowly. "Be careful, Elizabeth. The company needs you, but they'll sacrifice you in a heartbeat if you threaten the IPO." She looked up, then a half smile playing at her lips. "Then it's a good thing I've spent my life being unwanted, Frank. I know how to survive it." But as she watched him leave, a chill crept up her spine. She'd just challenged the board, and boards like foster care systems had ways of removing problems. That night, she didn't go back to her penthouse. She went to the Southside pie box in hand, heart hammering in her chest like a drum line before a verdict. When Jack opened the door, he blinked at her. "You brought dessert." "I brought an apology," she said, "but it comes in apple pie." He stepped aside. "Then you better come in. We don't turn away a redemption baked in crust." Inside, Sophie was coloring at the kitchen table, humming a Taylor Swift song and munching on apple slices. When she saw Elizabeth, her face lit up. "You came back," Elizabeth smiled. "I made a promise, didn't I?" Sophie beamed. "I saved a seat." She had a folded dish towel mark the spot beside her. Elizabeth sat down, feeling something unfasten inside her. Dinner was leftovers and laughter. Dessert was sweet and eaten too fast. After Sophie went to bed, Elizabeth lingered in the doorway of her room, watching as Jack tucked her in, brushing a curl from her forehead. "She's magic," Elizabeth whispered. "She's what keeps me honest," Jack said. They returned to the kitchen where dishes were stacked and moonlight poured in through the window like a soft benediction. "She asked if you were her new friend," Jack said. I didn't know how to answer. Elizabeth looked down. "I don't have many friends, not the real kind." "Why not?" "I used to think vulnerability was a weakness, that if people saw who I really was, they'd leave." Jack leaned against the counter. "Maybe. Or maybe they'd finally understand why you fight so hard." Elizabeth looked up, eyes shining but unshed. "I'm not used to being seen." "You are now," he said, "whether you're ready or not." She moved toward him slowly, as if afraid any sudden motion would shatter the quiet safety between them. "I had a board meeting today," she said. "They're trying to push me out over the next-gen pacemaker issue." His jaw tightened. "The heart device, what's wrong with it?" "Battery fluctuations. In rare cases, it can cause the device to fail. Our engineers found it during routine testing, but the board wants to keep it quiet until after the IPO." Jack finished for her. She nodded, surprised by his insight. "How did you know?" "I may just be a waiter now, but I was a history teacher. Power protects power, always has." "I ordered a full recall, every device, every patient notified." She reached for his hand, brushing her thumb over the calluses. "You and Sophie. You reminded me what real strength looks like. It's not cold or sharp. It's warm. It's messy. And it shows up anyway." Jack searched her face. "So what now?" Elizabeth took a breath. "Now I rebuild. But not just the company. Me. I want to be someone worthy of the trust I keep demanding." He didn't pull her closer. He didn't have to. She stepped into his arms like a decision she'd already made. And in that quiet kitchen, in the South Side, surrounded by chip plates, crayon drawings, and the hum of an old refrigerator, two people who had learned to survive alone began to choose something better together. What neither of them noticed was the small red notification light blinking on Elizabeth's phone buried in her purse. An email from Robert Keller to the entire board. "Emergency meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Re-leadership transition." The storm was just beginning. It was supposed to be simple. Just a dinner, 3 plates, 2 adults trying to navigate the strange bloom of something unspoken, and one child with glitter in her hair and spaghetti on her chin. But something about that night at Kingsley's, days after the apple pie truce, hummed with electricity, like the room itself had been waiting for the moment they'd walk in together. Not CEO and waiter, not headline and damage control, but something else. Elizabeth wore navy, not power navy, soft navy. Her hair was pinned loosely, a single strand curling at her cheek. She didn't look like the woman from the boardroom or the viral video. She looked like someone still deciding who she was. Jack, in a crisp white shirt rolled at the sleeves, held Sophie's hand as they entered. He didn't flinch at the stares, the whispers. He was used to being noticed now, but this time he wasn't alone. Barbara raised an eyebrow from behind the bar. "Should I light a candle or just bring the good plates?" she murmured as Jack passed. Jack smirked. "Both." They were seated at a quiet corner table, one usually reserved for anniversaries or apologies. Elizabeth glanced around. "You sure this doesn't violate 100 HR policies?" "We never had an HR department," Jack said. "Just Barbara, and she's too busy live tweeting this moment." Elizabeth laughed, and for the first time, it didn't sound rehearsed. It was low, surprised, and real. Sophie handed her a napkin folded like a swan. "I made it myself for you." Elizabeth took it carefully as if it were porcelain. "This is beautiful, thank you." "You can keep it," Sophie whispered, as if it were a sacred exchange. "In case you forget you're special." Elizabeth's throat tightened. She'd sat in rooms with billionaires, held awards, been interviewed by Forbes, but somehow nothing ever felt as heavy or holy as a paper napkin shaped like hope. Dinner was warm, messy, beautiful. They shared stories. Sophie's chaotic school play, Elizabeth's disastrous attempt at baking banana bread that exploded, and Jack's confession that he once mistook wasabi for avocado on a date and cried through an entire appetizer. By dessert, Sophie was asleep in Elizabeth's lap, a tiny hand curled into the folds of her coat. Jack reached across the table, gently brushing a crumb from Elizabeth's wrist. "You look terrified." "I am," she whispered. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much, of not deserving it." He tilted his head. Let me ask you something, Elizabeth. When you walk into a room, do you scan it for escape routes or soft places to land? She blinked. Escape routes. That's not power, that's survival. He leaned forward, voice quieter. You've been surviving for so long, you forgot what safe feels like. She looked down at Sophie. This feels dangerous. No, Jack said. It feels unfamiliar. There's a difference, wow. Elizabeth met his eyes. What if I break it? He reached over, touching her hand with both of his. Then we fix it together. Nothing here is porcelain, Elizabeth. We're all already cracked, but we hold anyway. Tears pooled but didn't fall. She wouldn't let them. Not here, not yet. Later they stepped out into the cool night. The city buzzed around them, horns' voices, lights flickering like restless thoughts. But for once, Elizabeth didn't feel alone in it. Jack carried Sophie, her head against his shoulder, and Elizabeth walked beside them in silence. They reached the curb where her car waited. Her driver stood beside the door but didn't move until she gave a nod. She turned to Jack. I've been thinking, she said. Dangerous, he replied with a smirk. I want to do something reckless. He arched a brow. I want to invite you to a charity gala. He blinked. Me? It's next week, full of people who pretend they care about things and dresses they'll never wear twice. I usually hate it. So why go, because this year, she said, voice steady, I want to show up with someone who reminds me why I started fighting in the first place. Jack didn't answer right away. Then Elizabeth, I'm a waiter from the South Side. I don't own a tux. I've never been to anything that required RSVP or valet. She stepped closer. You stood in a viral hurricane and didn't flinch. You comforted a woman the world labeled a villain. You raised a daughter with more grace than any man I've ever met. You think that's not gala-worthy? He stared at her. You're serious. I am. He looked down at Sophie, still asleep, her hair tangled and soft against his shirt. Then he looked at Elizabeth. Okay, he smiled. I'll go, but only if you promise not to run when they start whispering. I don't run anymore, she said. I walk into the fire now. And what if I'm the one who panics? She smiled gently. Then I'll remind you who you are, like you did for me. As her car pulled away, Elizabeth looked out the window and saw Jack still standing there, Sophie in his arms, his eyes on her. He didn't wave. He just watched, steady, present, safe. And for the first time in years, Elizabeth didn't feel like she was holding her breath. She felt ready for what came next. For the fire, for the faith, for the kind of love that didn't arrive in perfection, but in persistence. The emergency board meeting was held in the kind of conference room that smelled of power and imported leather. 8 a.m., and already the air was thick with ambition and expensive cologne. Elizabeth arrived 5 minutes early as she always did, but found the room already occupied. Robert Keller sat at the head of the table, her seat flanked by 3 board members and a man she didn't recognize. Elizabeth? Keller smiled with all the warmth of a shark. Thank you for joining us. She didn't sit. You're in my chair, Robert. Just keeping it warm. He didn't move. Allow me to introduce Bradley Wilson from Sunward Capital. They're interested in our company's future. The stranger nodded his eyes, calculating Elizabeth's worth in real time. Ms. Morgan, your reputation precedes you. I'm sure it does, she replied coolly. Now, would someone like to tell me why there's a potential investor at a closed board meeting? I wasn't informed about. Frank Donovan entered, then his face grim. I'd like to know the same thing. Keller's smile didn't waver. We're discussing contingencies, Frank, in light of recent events. Recent events. Elizabeth placed her portfolio on the table with controlled precision. You mean my decision to recall a potentially dangerous product before it kills someone, among other things. Keller slid a tablet across the table. Your erratic behavior, the viral incident, this interesting photo from Kingsley's 2 nights ago. Elizabeth's blood went cold. On the screen was a grainy image taken through the restaurant window, her Jack and Sophie laughing over dessert. You're having me followed. Market research. Keller shrugged. The board has concerns about your judgment lately, personally and professionally. Frank stepped forward. This is outrageous, Robert. Elizabeth built this company from nothing. The next gen recall was the right call ethically and legally. Perhaps, Keller conceded, but the timing is unfortunate. 6 weeks before IPO, the market will punish us severely. Better the market than the FDA, Elizabeth countered. Or did you forget what happened to Boston Scientific in '07? Bradley Wilson cleared his throat. If I may, Sunward Capital believes in Medinova's potential, but we also believe in stable leadership. We'd be prepared to offer a significant pre-IPO investment contingent on certain organizational adjustments. The room went silent. You want my resignation, Elizabeth said flatly. We want what's best for the company, Keller corrected. Your company, Elizabeth, the one you built. Don't you want to see it succeed? Elizabeth felt a familiar coldness creeping in, the one that had protected her through foster homes and boardrooms alike, the armor reassembling. But then she remembered Jack's words, I'm refusing to serve your anger. She took a slow breath. When did you know about the next-gen issue, Robert? Keller blinked. What? The battery fluctuation. When did you first see the reports? The same time you did. Elizabeth pulled a folder from her portfolio. That's interesting, because I have an email chain here forwarded to me last night by Michael Chen in engineering. It shows you received the preliminary test results 3 months ago, before we scaled production. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. You buried the report, she continued, pushed the product forward anyway. And now you want me to take the fall when it all comes crashing down. Keller's face hardened. Those emails are internal corporate documents. Sharing them could be considered corporate espionage, she finished for him, or whistleblowing. I haven't decided which yet. Depends on what happens in the next 5 minutes. Frank looked from Elizabeth to Keller, his surgeon's eyes dissecting the scene. Is this true, Robert? Keller didn't answer immediately, which was answer enough. Elizabeth turned to Bradley Wilson. Sunward Capital might want to reconsider who they're getting into bed with, because I'm not the loose cannon in this room. Wilson stood slowly, gathering his papers. I think we need to reevaluate our position. Thank you for your time, gentlemen. He nodded to Elizabeth. Ms. Morgan. After he left, the silence was deafening. You've just cost this company millions, Keller said quietly. No, Elizabeth replied. I just saved it from you. She walked to the head of the table and placed her hands on her chair. I'm calling for a vote of no confidence. In you, Robert, not me. Frank stood. Seconded. One by one, the other board members shifted in their seats, allegiances recalibrating in real time. This isn't over, Keller warned, standing. You're right, Elizabeth agreed. The SEC will have questions about those buried reports. I suggest you find a good lawyer. As Keller stormed out, Frank approached Elizabeth. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen. The line between the two is thinner than we think, she replied. The recall will still hurt us. The IPO might have to be delayed. Elizabeth nodded. Better delayed than built on lies. Frank studied her. Something's changed in you. She thought of Sophie's paper swan, of Jack's steady gaze of ice cream in the park. Everything's changed, Frank. I just needed someone to show me what I couldn't see anymore. The waiter, she smiled faintly. His name is Jack. Later that day, Elizabeth sat in her office watching the Manhattan skyline fade from gold to indigo as the sun set. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. Sophie says the moon looks like a fingernail tonight. Thought you might want to know. Such a small thing, such an enormous gift to be included in their noticing of the world. She was about to reply when her office door opened and Samantha, her assistant, rushed in, face pale. Elizabeth, you need to see this. She handed over a tablet open to the Wall Street Journal's website. The headline made Elizabeth's stomach drop. Medimec lawsuit alleges Medinova stole pacemaker technology. The article detailed accusations from Medimec, a rival company claiming Medinova had pilfered their battery technology for the next-gen device. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. Keller, Elizabeth muttered. He must have connections at Medimec. It gets worse, Samantha said. They've filed for an injunction to halt the recall, claiming it's an admission of guilt that could prejudice their case. Elizabeth closed her eyes briefly. He's willing to let people die to win. What do we do? Elizabeth looked back at the text from Jack, at the simple humanity of it, then at the article threatening everything she'd built. We fight, she said finally, but not his way. Call David Mercer at the Tribune. Tell him I'm ready to talk on the record. About everything. Elizabeth, are you sure the board? The board will have to decide which side of history they want to be on. She stood gathering her coat. I'm going out. Where, Elizabeth smiled grimly, to see a man about the moon. The Chicago Museum of Science and Industry gleamed like a neoclassical temple in the early afternoon sun. School groups in matching t-shirts streamed up the stiff's teachers calling out instructions that mostly went ignored. Inside, under the Grand Rotunda, Jack stood with a clipboard counting heads as his students explored the Apollo 11 exhibit. This was his other job, occasional substitute teacher at his old school. The pay was minimal, but it kept his foot in the door of the profession he loved. More importantly, it let him accompany Sophie's class on field trips like today's. Mr. Reynolds, Sophie called, waving frantically from beside a glass case containing a lunar module replica. Come see. He smiled, making his way through the crowd of third graders. What did you find, kiddo? It says the astronauts had to sleep in their spacesuits sometimes. Can you imagine like camping but in space? Jack knelt beside her. Pretty uncomfortable camping trip. But worth it, Sophie insisted, to see the stars up close. A familiar voice came from behind them. The astronauts on Apollo 11 said the stars actually weren't visible from the lunar surface. Jack turned to find Elizabeth standing there looking decidedly out of place in her tailored blazer among the chaotic energy of elementary schoolers. Yet somehow she seemed more at ease than he'd ever seen her. Sophie's face lit up. Miss Elizabeth, you came to see the moon too. Elizabeth smiled. I heard from a reliable source that I should pay attention to it. Jack stood surprised, giving way to concern as he noticed the tension around her eyes. Everything okay? No, she said quietly. But I didn't want to be alone today. Before he could respond, Sophie tugged at Elizabeth's hand. You have to see the command module. It's super small, but they lived in it for days and days. Elizabeth allowed herself to be pulled along, throwing a glance back at Jack that said, We'll talk later. For the next hour, Jack watched as Elizabeth Morgan, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, trailed after his daughter from exhibit to exhibit. She listened with genuine interest as Sophie explained facts she'd memorized about space travel. She asked questions. She even stood patiently in line so Sophie could experience the moon gravity simulator. She's good with her, observed Ms. Chen, the lead teacher, sidling up to Jack. Your friend, Jack hesitated. It's complicated. Life usually is, Ms. Chen smiled. But Sophie seems happy. Yeah, Jack agreed softly. She does. Later, as the class gathered for lunch in the museum cafeteria, Jack found a moment alone with Elizabeth at a separate table. Not that I'm not glad to see you, he began, but something tells me this isn't just about lunar modules. Elizabeth traced a pattern on the table with her finger. Robert Keller is trying to destroy me, and Medinova with me. She explained the board meeting, the lawsuit, the injunction against the recall. He's using people's lives as leverage, she finished. Patients with our devices in their chests, just pawns in his game. Jack listened, his face growing grimmer with each detail. What can I do? The question was so simple, so direct. Not, what will you do, or that's terrible. But what can I do, as if there was no question he would help, only how. Elizabeth looked at him, really looked at him. Why aren't you angry at the world, Jack? After everything you have lost, everything you have been through, why aren't you bitter? He considered this, watching Sophie across the room laughing with her friends. I was. For a while after Sarah died, I was furious at the cancer, at the doctors, at the insurance companies, at God. But then one morning, Sophie asked me why the sun was still shining if Mommy was gone. Elizabeth waited. I realized I had a choice. I could teach her that the world is cruel and unfair, which it often is. Or I could teach her that even in darkness, we can choose light. He smiled faintly. I decided to bet on light. Some days it's harder than others. Elizabeth reached across the table and took his hand. I need to tell the whole story. About NextGen, about Keller, about the patients at risk. But I need someone who understands the human cost, not just the business angle. You want me to talk to this reporter with you? Jack guessed. Yes, about Sarah. About what happens when medical companies put profit over people. Jack was silent for a long moment. I've spent 3 years keeping our story private, protecting Sophie from becoming the girl whose mom died. I know it's a lot to ask. But, he continued, Sarah would want her story to matter, to help others. He squeezed Elizabeth's hand. I'll do it, but I need to prepare Sophie first. Elizabeth nodded. Of course. And Jack, thank you. Don't thank me yet, he said. Keller sounds like a man with nothing to lose. This could get ugly. I'm counting on it, Elizabeth replied, a steely glint returning to her eyes. Sometimes things need to break completely before they can be rebuilt properly. Jack looked thoughtful. There's something else you should know, about me, about why this matters so much. What is it? I wasn't always just a history teacher, he said quietly. Before that, I was a Marine, served in Desert Storm. Elizabeth's eyes widened slightly. You were in the Gulf War. He nodded. Dhahran, February 25th, 1991. I was there when the Scud missile hit the barracks. Elizabeth went very still. You were at Dhahran. Yeah, lost some good friends that day. Was injured myself not badly. He rubbed his shoulder unconsciously. But I saw things, did things. Elizabeth's voice was barely audible. I was there too. Jack stared at her. What? I was in Dhahran, she repeated. Army, Medical Corps. I was one of the responders after the strike. The cafeteria, with all its noise and chaos, seemed to fade away as they looked at each other with new eyes. I remember, Elizabeth continued slowly, a Marine. He'd been hit with shrapnel, but insisted on helping evacuate others before being treated. He gave blood for a buddy even though he was bleeding himself. Jack's face had gone pale. That's not possible. He had blue eyes, she said, the kind that look right through you. I remember thinking they didn't belong in a place like that, eyes that honest. You were the medic, Jack whispered. The one who finally made me sit down. Who said, your friend needs your blood, not your death. They finished together. For a moment, neither spoke. The weight of cosmic coincidence or fate or whatever name might fit hung between them. All this time, Elizabeth finally said, we've been circling each other for decades. Jack shook his head in disbelief. The odds of this, 1 in millions, she agreed. Unless it's not random at all, he finished. Sophie bounded over, then breaking the spell. Daddy, can Miss Elizabeth come see our science fair next week? I'm doing my project on space medicine. Jack looked at Elizabeth, a new understanding passing between them. I think, he said carefully, Miss Elizabeth might be around for a lot of things from now on. Elizabeth's phone rang, shattering the moment. She checked the screen. It's Frank Donovan. She answered, listening intently, her expression darkening. When a pause, I'll be right there. She hung up, already gathering her things. I have to go. The FDA just announced they're investigating us over the next-gen issue. Keller must have contacts there too. Jack stood. Go. Do what you need to do. We'll talk tonight. Elizabeth hesitated, then leaned in and kissed his cheek. Dhahran, she whispered. How did I not recognize you? We were different people then, he said. Maybe we needed to become these versions of ourselves to find each other again. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. I'll call you later. As she rushed off, Jack touched his cheek where her lips had been watching her disappear into the crowd. Sophie tugged at his sleeve. Daddy, is Miss Elizabeth your girlfriend now? Jack looked down at his daughter, her eyes so much like Sarah's. No, sweetheart, not exactly. But you like her, and she likes you, I can tell. It's complicated, Soph. She rolled her eyes with all the dramatic flair of an 8-year-old. Grown-ups always say that when they're scared. Jack chuckled. When did you get so smart? I've always been smart, she declared. You just haven't been paying attention. As they rejoined the class, Jack couldn't help but wonder what Sarah would think of all this. Of Elizabeth, of their unlikely connection, of the strange way past and present were colliding. He liked to believe she'd approve. Sarah had always told him not to get stuck. Life is for the living, Jack, she'd said in those final weeks. Promise me you'll keep living it. He'd promised. And for the first time in 3 years, he felt like he might actually be keeping that promise. The FDA investigation hit like a tsunami. By evening, Medinova's stock had plummeted 27%. Emergency room physicians nationwide were being advised to monitor patients with next-gen devices. The media was circling, hungry for blood. Elizabeth stood in her office watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens. Financial news channels showing the stock in freefall. Medical news reporting on the potential risks. Social media exploding with speculation and accusation. Frank entered without knocking. The legal team is preparing a statement. PR wants to know if you're going to make a personal appearance. Not yet, Elizabeth replied. First, I need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. We're dealing with Robert Keller trying to sink this company before you can expose him, Frank said bluntly. It's more than that. Elizabeth turned from the screens. I've been going through the next-gen files. The battery issue isn't random. It's a design flaw that shouldn't have made it past initial testing. What are you saying? I'm saying someone deliberately concealed problems during development. Someone with authority to override safety protocols. Frank's expression darkened. Keller, or someone working for him. Elizabeth sank into her chair. But why? Why push a flawed product knowing it could fail, knowing it could hurt people, knowing it would eventually come to light? Frank was silent for a moment. Unless that was the point. Elizabeth looked up sharply. What if Keller wanted the product to fail after the IPO when Medinova's value was at its peak? Short selling, Elizabeth breathed. He could make millions betting against his own company. And with you as CEO during the crisis. I'd take the fall, she finished, while he walks away rich. Frank nodded grimly. It's diabolical, but it fits. Elizabeth stood, newfound energy coursing through her. We need proof. Trading records communication between Keller and anyone involved in the next-gen development. That won't be easy to get, not quickly. Then we'll start with what we have. Elizabeth picked up her phone. I'm meeting with a reporter tomorrow. David Mercer from the Tribune. I want you there. Frank raised an eyebrow. You're going public with this. The board will have a collective aneurysm. The board needs to decide whose side they're on, the patients or the profits. And if they choose wrong, Elizabeth's gaze hardened, then they don't deserve to be part of what comes next. Frank studied her for a long moment. You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another ambitious startup founder. Brilliant but cold. I didn't think you cared about people-only innovation. Maybe I didn't, she admitted. Not enough. What changed? Elizabeth thought about Jack, about their shared past. She'd somehow forgotten about Sophie's paper swan. I remembered who I was before I built all these walls. Frank nodded, understanding in his eyes. Well, I'm glad, because we're going to need that person to get through what's coming. After he left, Elizabeth tried calling Jack, but the call went to voicemail. She texted instead. Things escalating here. FDA investigation underway. Meeting with reporter tomorrow at 10. Still want to join? His response came minutes later. I'll be there. Sophie knows everything now. She says to tell you the moon is helping. Not sure what that means, but she insisted. Elizabeth smiled despite everything. Tell her I'm counting on it. And Jack, thank you. For what? For reminding me there are things worth fighting for besides balance sheets and stock prices. Like what? She hesitated, then typed. Like people who see you even when you're invisible to yourself. His reply was simple. Get some rest, Elizabeth. Tomorrow we go to war. She set down her phone, turning back to the windows where the city lights mirrored the stars hidden by urban glow. Somewhere out there, Robert Keller was plotting his next move. Somewhere out there, patients with potentially faulty devices were going about their lives unaware of the corporate battle being waged over their hearts. And somewhere out there, in a small apartment in the South Side, was a man who'd once given blood while bleeding himself. A man who, against all odds, had circled back into her life exactly when she needed someone who understood both sacrifice and survival. Elizabeth Morgan had never been one for signs or spiritual meaning. But tonight, looking at the same moon Sophie had declared looked like a fingernail, she allowed herself to wonder if some things were too perfectly imperfect to be mere coincidence. The next morning dawned cold and clear, the kind of Chicago autumn day where the sky seems impossibly blue and brittle. Elizabeth arrived at the Tribune building early, dressed not in her usual power suit, but in something softer, still professional, but less armored. A conscious choice. Today wasn't about CEO Morgan. It was about Elizabeth, the woman who'd once been an army medic, who'd once dreamed of healing before Empire Building took over. Jack was already waiting in the lobby, looking both out of place and perfectly at ease in his worn leather jacket and button-down shirt. A skill he had existing comfortably in spaces not designed for him. You ready for this? He asked as she approached. No, she admitted, but it needs to be done. Sophie made you something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clumsily folded paper star. For luck. Elizabeth took it carefully, a lump forming in her throat. Thank you, I'll keep it close. They rode the elevator in companionable silence, the kind that exists only between people who've seen each other's true faces and decided to stay anyway. David Mercer was waiting in a conference room mid-50s with the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades chasing stories that mattered. He stood as they entered, extending his hand first to Elizabeth, then to Jack. Miss Morgan, Mr. Reynolds, thank you for coming. They sat and Mercer placed a recorder on the table. Before we begin, I want to be clear. This is on the record, but you'll have a chance to review quotes before publication. I'm interested in the truth, not sensationalism. Elizabeth nodded. That's why we chose you, Mr. Mercer. Call me David. He turned to Jack. And you're here because... Jack glanced at Elizabeth, then back to Mercer. Because I've seen what happens when medical companies prioritize profits over patients. My wife Sarah died 3 years ago. Breast cancer. I'm sorry for your loss, Mercer said, and seemed to mean it. The cancer would have taken her eventually, Jack continued. But what broke us first was the system, the denied claims, the experimental treatments our insurance wouldn't cover. The choice between mortgage payments or medication. Elizabeth watched him, pain etching itself across her face. This was the real cost of corporate healthcare. Not numbers on a spreadsheet, but lives torn apart one denial code at a time. And you, Miss Morgan, why bring this story to me now? Elizabeth took a deep breath. Because Medinova is at a crossroads. We developed a cardiac device called NextGen. It has a potentially dangerous flaw, a battery issue that could cause it to fail. When I ordered a full recall, certain board members led by Robert Keller tried to suppress it. Because of the upcoming IPO, Mercer guessed, already taking notes. Partly, but I believe there's more. Elizabeth leaned forward. I believe Keller deliberately pushed a flawed product to market knowing it would eventually fail. Mercer's eyebrows shot up. That's a serious accusation. Do you have evidence? Some, not enough, yet. Why would he do that? To short the stock after the IPO. To make millions when the company he helped build crashed and burned. Mercer whistled low. And you think he orchestrated the FDA investigation too? I think the timing is suspicious. Jack spoke up. People's lives are at stake. Patients who trust that the devices in their bodies were made with care, not calculation. Mercer studied them both. You realize this story could tank your company before the IPO ever happens. Cost, jobs, investments, future innovations. Yes, Elizabeth said quietly. But a company built on lies isn't worth saving. The people who work there, the patients who need our products, they deserve better. And you're prepared for the personal cost. Keller and his allies will come after you with everything they have. Elizabeth reached into her pocket, feeling Sophie's paper star. I've survived worse. Jack's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, frowning. It's Barbara from Kingsley's. She says there's someone there I need to speak with. Says it's urgent. Go, Elizabeth said. I can finish here. Jack hesitated. You sure? I'm sure. Give Barbara my best. After Jack left, Mercer turned off his recorder. Off the record now. There's more to your connection with him than just this story, isn't there? Elizabeth smiled faintly. Sometimes the universe has a strange sense of humor. I've been a reporter for 30 years, Miss Morgan. I've developed a sense for when there's a deeper story beneath the one being told. There's always a deeper story, Mr. Mercer, but some parts aren't mine alone to share. He nodded, respecting the boundary. Fair enough. Back on the record. She nodded and he switched the recorder back on. Let's talk about the patients, he said. How many have the next-gen device implanted? What's being done to protect them? And so the interview continued. Elizabeth laying bare the technical details, the timeline, the corporate maneuvering. But her mind kept drifting to Jack, wondering what urgent matter had called him away and why the universe had seen fit to bring them back into each other's orbit after all these years. At Kingsley's, Jack found Barbara waiting nervously at the bar. He's in the back booth, she said without preamble. Says he used to work with your wife. Jack's brow furrowed. What's his name? Michael Chen. Says he's an engineer at Medinova. Jack made his way through the half-empty restaurant to the back booth. A man in his early 30s sat hunched over a coffee, constantly glancing toward the door. When he saw Jack, he straightened. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm Michael Chen. I worked with the Next Gen development team." Jack slid into the booth across from him. "You knew Sarah?" Chen nodded. "She was a clinical consultant on the original prototype before she got sick." Jack felt a chill run through him. "What? Your wife helped design the safety protocols for the first generation device, the ones that were later modified?" "By Keller, Dormar," Jack guessed. Chen glanced around nervously. "I can't be seen talking to you, but you need to know the battery issue isn't the only problem. There's a firmware vulnerability too, one that could allow remote access to the device." Jack's blood ran cold. "Are you saying someone could hack into a pacemaker?" "Theoretically, with the right equipment, right proximity." Chen slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything's here. The original safety protocols Sarah helped design, the changes Keller ordered, the tests that were buried." Jack stared at the small device. "Why are you giving this to me and not Elizabeth?" "Because Morgan Technology is watching her, monitoring her communications, her movements. Keller has connections there. They provided the surveillance." Chen stood. "Your wife was a good person, Mr. Reynolds. She wouldn't have wanted her work used like this." As Chen hurried out, Jack sat motionless, the flash drive heavy in his palm. Sarah, all this time she'd been connected to Medinova, to the very device now at the center of the storm. It couldn't be coincidence. Nothing about this was coincidence anymore. He pulled out his phone to call Elizabeth, then hesitated, remembering Chen's warning about surveillance. Instead, he texted, "Need to see you, not at your office, somewhere private. It's about Sarah." Her reply came quickly. "My penthouse, 8 p.m. Security knows to expect you." As Jack left Kingsley's, he didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street or the man inside photographing him through a telephoto lens. The game was changing pieces, moving on a board larger than any of them had imagined. By evening, the FDA investigation had expanded. Medinova's stock had fallen another 15%. Emergency rooms nationwide were receiving guidelines for monitoring patients with the device. The medical community was in an uproar. Elizabeth stood in her penthouse kitchen pouring 2 glasses of bourbon. The space around her was minimalist, expensive, and oddly impersonal, more hotel suite than home. No photos, no mementos, nothing that couldn't be replaced in a day. The habitat of someone who'd never quite learned how to put down roots. The elevator chimed, and Jack stepped out, looking grim. "We need to talk." She handed him a glass. That phrase never precedes good news. "Sarah worked for Medinova," he said without preamble, "as a clinical consultant. She helped design the original safety protocols for what became the Next Gen." Elizabeth nearly dropped her glass. "That's not possible. I would have known." "It was 6 years ago, before you became CEO, when the company was still small." He pulled out the flash drive. "Michael Chen from your engineering team gave me this. Said Sarah's safety protocols were later modified. By Keller." Elizabeth took the drive, staring at it. Jack, this changes everything." "There's more. Chen says there's a firmware vulnerability, that the devices could potentially be accessed remotely." "Hacked, that's terrifying," Jack finished. "And according to Chen, you're being watched. By Morgan Technology working with Keller." Elizabeth's face hardened. "Morgan Tech, of course. They've been trying to acquire us for years." She moved to her laptop, inserting the drive. Files populated the screen: technical specifications, safety protocols, test results. And there it was, Sarah Reynolds, clinical safety consultant. "Jack," Elizabeth said softly, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea." He moved beside her, eyes fixed on his wife's name. "All this time, it's like she's been trying to tell us something." Elizabeth scrolled through the documents. These original protocols were rock solid. Multiple redundancies, fail-safes. But look here. She pointed to later modifications. These changes stripped away half the safety measures, simplified the firmware to save production costs. "Making it vulnerable," Jack said, "and potentially lethal." Elizabeth continued reading, her expression growing darker. "Jack, according to these logs, Keller pushed these changes through right after Sarah's diagnosis." Jack went very still. "What are you saying? I'm saying the timeline is suspicious. Sarah designs safety protocols. Sarah gets cancer. Keller removes those protocols. Elizabeth looked up at him. What if she found something? Something that threatened his plans. And he made sure she wouldn't be around to stop him. Jack's voice was barely audible. I don't know, Elizabeth admitted, but nothing about this feels like coincidence anymore. Jack paced the room, trying to process. So what now? Elizabeth closed the laptop. Now we use this, all of it. We take it to Mercer, to the FDA, to the board. And Keller will fight back. Hard. Elizabeth drained her glass. He has too much to lose. Jack stopped pacing, looking out at the city lights. You know what Sarah used to say about bullies, that they're only as powerful as the fear they create. She sounds like she was very wise. She was. Jack turned back to Elizabeth. And she'd want us to finish what she started. Elizabeth nodded, a new resolve settling over her. Tomorrow, then, we end this. Tomorrow, Jack agreed. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of revelation and responsibility pressing down on them both. Then Jack stepped closer, reaching for Elizabeth's hand. Whatever happens, he said quietly, I'm glad it was you. That it was your company, your fight, that we found each other again. Elizabeth met his gaze, no longer the ice queen, no longer the untouchable CEO. Just a woman who'd spent too long fighting alone. In Dahran, she said softly, when I saw you giving blood, even though you were injured, I thought, that's what courage looks like. I've never forgotten that image. And I remember thinking, Jack replied, as you patched me up, that your hands were too gentle for a war zone, that they belonged somewhere they could build, not just repair. Elizabeth smiled sadly. And instead, I built a fortress. We both did. Jack touched her cheek. Maybe it's time to tear them down. She leaned into his touch, eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, there was a clarity that hadn't been there before. Stay, she whispered. Tonight, I don't want to be alone with all of this. Jack hesitated, not out of reluctance, but reverence for the moment's significance. Are you sure? In answer, Elizabeth stepped closer and kissed him, not desperately or passionately, but with the quiet certainty of someone coming home after a long journey. Jack's arms encircled her, holding her, as if she might break, or as if she were the only solid thing in a world turning to sand. Neither spoke when they finally parted. No words were necessary. They had both spent too long in empty spaces guarding vacant thrones. Tonight, at least, the silence would not be solitary. What they couldn't know, was that across town, Robert Keller was meeting with the CEO of Morgan Technology, finalizing plans that would make tomorrow's battle far more dangerous than either of them anticipated. The flash drive Jack carried had triggered a silent alarm, a tracking program embedded in the files. Chen had been followed. The trap was already sprung. They have the files, Keller said, swirling amber liquid in a crystal tumbler. Just as we expected. Morgan Technology's CEO, Arthur Bishop, a silver-haired man with cold eyes, nodded. Then we moved to phase 2. The board meeting is scheduled for 9 a.m. Elizabeth will be removed as CEO, the recall halted, and by noon the merger announcement will stabilize both our stocks. And Reynolds, Bishop's expression didn't change. A tragic accident, tonight preferably. The emotionally unstable widower drinking after visiting his late wife's former employer. The press will eat it up. Keller hesitated. Is that necessary? He's just a waiter. He's a Marine with a vendetta and evidence of corporate malfeasance. Bishop corrected. He's a liability. And the daughter will be well provided for, anonymously, of course. Bishop checked his watch. My men are in position. It will be handled cleanly. Keller nodded, pushing down a flicker of doubt. He'd come too far to develop a conscience now. The game was almost won. Neither man noticed the busboy clearing glasses at the next table or the phone in his pocket recording every word of their conversation. Barbara Thompson had friends in unexpected places and eyes and ears everywhere. The storm was indeed coming, but perhaps not in the direction Keller and Bishop anticipated. The night deepened over Chicago's stars, hidden behind clouds heavy with unshed rain. In Elizabeth's penthouse, two people who had circled each other across decades finally found a moment of peace before the coming battle. In a small apartment in the South Side, Sophie Reynolds slept soundly, watched over by Barbara Thompson, unaware of the forces gathering around her father. And in the gleaming offices of Medinova, a security guard making his rounds noticed a light still on in the engineering department, where Michael Chen worked feverishly to back up servers that might soon be erased. The pieces were set. The game, deadly serious now, was approaching its final moves. By this time tomorrow, nothing would be the same for any of them. The chandelier overhead dripped crystal like frozen fire. The ballroom of the Drake Hotel was a living portrait of opulence, men in tuxedos, women in gowns that whispered secrets with every step. Music floated from a string quartet in the corner, the kind of music that didn't fill a room but curated it. And in the middle of it all, Jack Reynolds stood very still. His tux rented and a bit snug in the shoulders wasn't the problem. It was the mirrors, so many of them reflecting versions of him that didn't belong here. Versions that reminded him of another life before Sarah, before Sophie, before a moment of quiet courage in a Manhattan steakhouse changed everything. "You okay?" Elizabeth's voice came from behind him, soft and certain. He turned and lost his breath. She wore midnight, deep clean and unadorned. No sequins, no shimmer, just one off-the-shoulder line and a neckline that left little room for doubt. She had never needed sparkle to command a room. He stared. She smiled. "You clean up nice." "You," he started, but couldn't quite land the sentence, "look like power wrapped in silk." "Good," she said, stepping beside him, "because I'm going to need it." After the revelations of the previous night, Sarah's connection to Medinova, the flash drive, the altered safety protocols, they had made a decision. The charity gala would proceed as planned. To cancel would alert Keller that they were onto him. Better to maintain the illusion of normalcy while they prepared their counterattack. The morning's emergency board meeting would be the real battlefield. They made their way through the ballroom like a slow-motion ripple in a perfect pond. Eyes followed them first in curiosity, then in recognition. Some whispered, some stared outright, and still Elizabeth didn't flinch. "Remind me why I agreed to this," Jack murmured. "Because I asked," she replied, "and because part of healing is walking straight into the place that once made you small." He took a breath. "Well, this place is doing a great job of that." "You don't look small," she said, looping her arm through his. "You look like the only person here who remembers how to breathe." Dinner was served, speeches began, and then came the auction. Each year, the gala raised millions through absurdity, private jets for a weekend vineyard tours, with celebrity chefs, paintings that were half canvas, half ego. But this year's centerpiece, a dinner with Elizabeth Morgan, priceless, limited to one bidder. All proceeds to children's medical research. The MC in a tux that sparkled raised the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen, for the first time ever, Ms. Morgan has donated herself to the cause. A private dinner anywhere in the world, any topic on the table except maybe table manners." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Elizabeth rose, took a brief, poised bow, and sat back down. Jack leaned in. "You didn't tell me about this." "I didn't know until an hour ago. Nick added it as a surprise." "And you're okay with being auctioned off?" She shrugged. "If it helps sick children, I'll survive a steak and small talk." The bidding began. 10,000, 20,000, 35,000, a woman in red, a hedge fund manager, a tech bro in Italian shoes. The room swirled in wealth and ego. Then from the back, quietly but clearly, came another voice. 100,000, Jack said. The room stilled. Elizabeth turned stunned. "Jack." He didn't look at her. He looked at the MC. 100,000 for the dinner. I'll pay it tonight." Gasps fluttered like moths against the chandelier light. "Sir, do you have credentials for that bid?" the MC asked, half panicked. Jack pulled out his phone, tapped a few keys. "Bank transfer confirmed. Should be in your account by the end of dessert." A pause. The MC looked to the charity director, who gave a small nod. "Sold," he announced, flustered, to the gentleman with the quiet confidence. Applause broke out, awkward but present. Elizabeth stared at him. "Jack, that was reckless." "Insane," she replied. "Where did you get that kind of money?" He exhaled slowly. "Sarah had a life insurance policy. I've never touched it. Not until tonight." "Jack, you said healing meant walking into what once hurt. I've walked into too many rooms where I couldn't afford to stay. This time I bought the room." Elizabeth's breath caught. He wasn't showing off. He was showing up. And there, under the glittering eyes of Manhattan's elite, Elizabeth reached for his hand and didn't let go. On the far side of the ballroom, Robert Keller watched the exchange with cold calculation. Beside him, Arthur Bishop of Morgan Technology sipped champagne that never touched his eyes. They look cozy, Bishop observed. More than professional. Does it matter? Keller asked. By morning she'll be out, and Reynolds will be a non-issue. Bishop checked his watch. Speaking of which, my men report a problem. Reynolds' daughter isn't at his apartment. Neither is he. Where are they? The daughter is staying with the restaurant manager. Reynolds appears to have spent the night at Morgan's penthouse. Bishop's smile was tight. Complicates things. Keller swirled his drink. Not necessarily. Two birds, one stone has its advantages. Indeed, Bishop nodded toward Jack and Elizabeth. They're leaving. Shall we? No, Keller said. Too public. Let them have their night. Tomorrow will be soon enough. As they spoke, Barbara Thompson, seated at a table near the exit, watched them carefully. The recording from the restaurant secure in her pocket, she slipped out her phone and sent a single text to David Mercer at the Tribune. They're moving tonight. Be ready. After the gala, Jack and Elizabeth stood outside beneath a sky that felt too vast for a city so crowded. You didn't have to do that, she said softly. I know. You don't owe me anything. I know. She turned to him, trembling with something deeper than fear. Then why? He took a long moment before answering. Because you're not the woman in that video, he said, and I wanted this city to see that. She blinked fast. And what do you see? He stepped closer. I see someone who wants to be soft without being broken, someone who learned to fight in silence and now wants to speak in truth. I see a woman who finally believes she's worthy of being chosen not for what she built, but for who she is underneath it all. She closed her eyes, and then she did the most dangerous thing she could. She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't poised. But it was real. And when they finally pulled apart, breathless, under a sky no longer so vast, Jack whispered, You're not porcelain anymore, Elizabeth. She smiled through the tears. No, I think I finally became fireproof. Their car arrived sleek and silent. As they slid into the back seat, neither noticed the sedan that pulled away from the curb behind them, keeping a careful distance. Elizabeth's driver, a veteran who'd worked for her for years, did notice. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then to his passengers. Ms. Morgan, he said quietly, I believe we're being followed. Elizabeth stiffened. Jack's hand instinctively tightened around hers. How long, she asked. Since we left the hotel. Black sedan, 2 occupants. Jack turned, trying to see through the tinted rear window. Keller, Otto, or Morgan Tech, Elizabeth replied. They're moving faster than we thought. The driver cleared his throat. Your penthouse may not be safe, ma'am. Elizabeth thought quickly. Take us to the peninsula. Book the executive suite under the name Sarah Reynolds. Jack looked at her sharply. Using my wife's name, a name they won't be watching for, she explained. We need someplace secure to regroup. The driver nodded, making a sudden turn that momentarily lost their tail. Jack pulled out his phone. I should check on Sophie. Use my phone, Elizabeth said. They might be tracking yours. He dialed Barbara's number. She answered on the first ring. Jack, is everything okay? We're being followed. Don't tell me where you are, just, is Sophie safe? Yes, we're with friends, military friends. Barbara's voice was steady. And Jack Mercer has the recording. It's all happening tomorrow. Good. Stay low. I'll contact you when it's safe. After he hung up, he explained to Elizabeth about the recording Barbara had obtained Keller and Bishop, discussing plans to remove Elizabeth and the implied threat against Jack. Her face went pale, then hardened into resolve. So it's not just corporate malfeasance, she said. It's conspiracy to commit murder. Seems that way. The car pulled into the underground garage of the peninsula. The driver came around to open their door. I'll stay with the car, ma'am. Keep watch. Thank you, Marcus. Elizabeth touched his arm. Be careful. Always a ma'am. Inside the hotel, the executive suite was a fortress of luxury, no windows accessible from adjacent buildings, secure entry, and most importantly, anonymity. Elizabeth kicked off her heels, the goddess of industry transforming back into a woman with tired feet and a heavy heart. We should be safe here, she said, for tonight at least. Jack loosened his bow tie, the rental tux suddenly feeling like a costume he couldn't wait to shed. What's the plan for tomorrow? Elizabeth moved to the desk, opening the laptop provided by the hotel. The board meeting is at 9. Mercer will run the story at 8 with the recording. The FDA will receive the complete next-gen files, including Sarah's original protocols and Keller's modifications. And Frank Donovan will introduce a motion to remove Keller from the board before he can do the same to me. And if that doesn't work, she looked up, steel in her eyes, then I burn it all down. I go public with everything. The next-gen flaws, the cover-up, Keller's connection to Morgan Tech, all of it. Even if it means Medinova doesn't survive. Jack sat on the edge of the bed watching her. You'd sacrifice your own company. A company built on lies isn't worth saving, she said simply. And maybe that's the lesson in all this. Sometimes we have to lose what we built to find what we're meant to build next. He nodded slowly. Sarah would have said the same thing. Elizabeth closed the laptop and came to sit beside him. Tell me about her, the real her, not just the clinical consultant. Jack was quiet for a moment, gathering memories like precious stones. She loved thunderstorms, used to drag me onto the porch to watch them roll in, said there was nothing more honest than the sky when it couldn't hold back anymore. He smiled faintly. She sang in the shower badly, knew every word to every Beatles song ever written, cried at dog food commercials, but could watch horror movies without flinching. Elizabeth listened not just with courtesy, but with genuine interest, as if collecting pieces of a woman she'd never meet, but whose absence had shaped the man beside her. She sounds wonderful, she said when he finally fell silent. She was, and she would have liked you. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. The cold CEO, somehow I doubt that. No, Jack corrected gently. The woman who ordered a recall, even knowing it might cost her everything. The woman who remembers being a medic before she was an executive. That woman Sarah would have respected. Elizabeth's eyes filled. I hope so. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of tomorrow pressing down like a physical thing. Then Jack stood, holding out his hand. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. She took his hand, allowing him to pull her to her feet. They stood close, the air between them charged with everything still unsaid. Jack, she began. I know, he said softly. We don't have to figure it all out tonight. She nodded, grateful for his understanding. Thank you for the bid, for being here, for seeing me. Always, he promised, and it felt like more than just a word. It felt like a future neither of them had dared imagine until now. The morning broke with a storm, not the metaphorical one they were prepared for, but an actual deluge that turned Chicago's streets into mirrors, reflecting a bruised sky. Jack woke first, reaching automatically for his phone, before remembering they'd turned both their devices off overnight to prevent tracking. He slipped from the bed, careful not to wake Elizabeth, who had finally fallen asleep just hours before. Moving to the hotel room phone, he called the front desk. This is Mr. Reynolds in the executive suite. Could you send up a copy of this morning's Tribune, please, and coffee? Lots of coffee. 20 minutes later, a discreet knock announced room service. Jack opened the door to find not only coffee and newspapers, but Marcus, Elizabeth's driver, looking grim. We have a problem, Marcus said without preamble. Keller's moved the board meeting up. It started 30 minutes ago. Jack's blood ran cold. How do you know? I have a friend who works security at Medinova. Keller arrived with armed Morgan Tech security personnel at 7 a.m. They're not letting anyone in or out of the executive floor. Damn it. Jack ran a hand through his hair. Elizabeth needs to know. And what about Mercer? Did the story run? Marcus handed him the Tribune. The front page was dominated by another story entirely, a political scandal involving the mayor. Page 6, he said, business section, barely a mention of potential concerns about Medinova's upcoming IPO. Jack flipped to the page. The article was small, vague, and lacking any of the damning evidence they provided. This isn't right. Mercer had the recording, the files. Mr. Reynolds, Marcus's voice dropped lower. My friend says Mercer never showed up at his apartment last night. His editor hasn't heard from him. The implications hit Jack like a physical blow. They got to him, or intercepted the evidence. Jack closed the door, mind racing. We need to wake Elizabeth, and we need to find Barbara and Sophie. Marcus nodded. I'll bring the car around. But sir, you should know, there are men watching the hotel, 2 in the lobby, 1 by each exit. Morgan Tech. Most likely. Jack's jaw tightened. Then we need another way out. Inside the room, Elizabeth was already awake, standing by the window in a hotel robe, watching the rain lash against the glass. She turned as Jack entered. One look at his face told her everything. What's happened? He explained quickly the moved-up board meeting, the missing reporter, the watered-down article, the men watching the hotel. They're making their move, she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. Locking down Medinova, neutralizing threats. We need to get to the board meeting. No, Elizabeth shook her head. It's too late for that. They'll have security primed to stop me. We need a different approach. Like what? She moved to the desk, picking up the hotel phone. Like going nuclear. She dialed a number from memory. Who are you calling? Jack asked. The one person Keller can't control or intimidate. She held up a finger as the call connected. Dr. Phillips, it's Elizabeth Morgan. Yes, I know what time it is. I need you to issue a Class Y recall notice for all next-gen devices immediately. A pause. No, I don't have time to explain the proper channels. This is a direct order from the CEO of Medinova. Lives are at stake. She listened for a moment, then her voice hardened. Doctor, I have evidence that the next-gen has a deliberate firmware vulnerability that could allow remote access. Yes, as in hackable. I'm sending you the files now. She motioned to Jack for the flash drive. Check your email in 5 minutes. And Dr. Phillips, if anyone tries to countermand this order, call the FDA directly. She hung up, turning to Jack with fierce determination. Dr. Phillips is our chief medical officer. She answers only to me, not the board. She'll issue the recall through medical channels, bypassing corporate entirely. And if Keller tries to stop it, then he's on record attempting to prevent a safety recall. That's criminal negligence at minimum. Jack stared at her with newfound admiration. You're not going down without a fight. I'm not going down at all, she corrected. Now we need to get out of here, undetected, and find Barbara and Sophie. Then we take the fight directly to the source. Morgan Tech, Jack guessed. Elizabeth nodded grimly. Arthur Bishop has wanted my company for years. Now we know he's willing to commit crimes to get it. Time to shine a light on that particular cockroach. Marcus knocked again, entering with urgency. Ms. Morgan, they're coming up. 4 men just entered the elevator. How long do we have? Jack asked, already moving toward their minimal belongings. 2 minutes, maybe less. Elizabeth grabbed the laptop quickly, typing an email to Dr. Phillips with the next-gen files attached. Is there another way out? Marcus moved to the connecting door that led to the adjacent suite. Service corridor through here. It leads to the staff elevator. Let's go. They moved quickly, Elizabeth barefoot in her borrowed hotel robe, Jack still in his rumpled tuxedo pants and undershirt. They probably looked like the aftermath of a wild night rather than fugitives fleeing corporate assassins, which might work in their favor. The service corridor was narrow and utilitarian, a stark contrast to the luxury they'd just left. Marcus led them to a freighted elevator, swiping a key card he'd somehow acquired. This will take us to the loading dock, he explained. My car is waiting. As the elevator descended, Jack's mind raced. We need to find out what happened to Mercer. If they silenced him. We need proof first, Elizabeth interrupted. Accusations without evidence will just make us look desperate and paranoid. We have the flash drive with the next-gen files. We need more. We need the recording Barbara made of Keller and Bishop. The elevator doors opened onto a rain-soaked loading dock. Marcus's town car idled nearby, engine running. They made a dash for it through the downpour, Elizabeth's bare feet splashing through puddles, her hotel robe clinging to her like a second skin. Once inside the relative safety of the car, Marcus handed Elizabeth a bag. Clothes, ma'am. I took the liberty of having the hotel provide some basics. She accepted gratefully. Marcus, you're a godsend. Where to? He asked, pulling away from the hotel and checking for tails. Elizabeth and Jack exchanged looks. Barbara first, Jack decided. She has the recording, and I need to know Sophie is safe. Do you know where they are? Not exactly, but Barbara mentioned military friends. There's a veterans center in Pilsen where she volunteers. It's a start. As they drove through the rain-slicked streets, Elizabeth changed in the back seat, transforming herself from bedraggled escapee to something closer to her usual composed self, albeit in jeans and a sweater rather than her customary power suit. Jack checked the burner phone Marcus had provided. Still no word from Barbara, he said, tension evident in his voice. We'll find them, Elizabeth assured him, squeezing his hand. The Veterans Center was a brick building with a flag hanging limply in the rain. As Marcus pulled up, Jack spotted a familiar figure standing under the awning, Barbara smoking a cigarette despite the sign prohibiting it directly above her head. She dropped the cigarette as they approached, relief washing over her face. Thank God, we've been trying to reach you. Where's Sophie? Jack asked immediately. Inside, safe, with Colonel Martinez and his wife. She looked from Jack to Elizabeth. You heard about Mercer. That he's missing, Miss. Barbara shook her head. Not missing, hospitalized. Someone ran him off the road last night. He's in intensive care at Chicago Memorial. Elizabeth's face darkened. And the recording, safe. Barbara pulled a small voice recorder from her pocket. Never left my side. But Mercer's laptop with the next-gen files and his draft article gone from the accident scene. Jack took the recorder, turning it over in his hands. We need to get this to someone who can use it. Someone Keller can't silence or intimidate. The FBI, Elizabeth suggested. This crosses state lines, involves multiple companies. It's their jurisdiction. I have a contact, Barbara said. Former Marine, now FBI White-Collar Crime Division. But we need to move. Martinez says men were watching the center earlier. They left when the police drove by, but they'll be back. Sophie first, Jack insisted. I said to get her somewhere truly safe before we do anything else. Inside, Sophie sat at a table with an older couple coloring intently. When she saw Jack, she leapt up with a squeal of delight. Daddy, you're wearing your fancy clothes. He scooped her up, holding her tight, his world narrowing to the feel of her small body in his arms. Hey, kiddo, having fun with Colonel Martinez? He taught me how to play chess. She looked over his shoulder. Hi, Miss Elizabeth. You look different. Elizabeth smiled despite everything. Is that good or bad? Good, Sophie decided. You look more like a regular person and less like a princess. Sophie, Jack said, setting her down but keeping hold of her hand. We need to go on a little trip. Right now. Her face fell. But what about school? What about my science project? It's due Monday. School will understand, and your project will still be there when we get back. He knelt to her level. Remember how we talked about sometimes having to be brave when things get scary? She nodded solemnly, like Mom was brave. Exactly like that. Right now, I need you to be brave while we go somewhere safe. Are bad people after us? Like in the movies. Jack hesitated, not wanting to frighten her, but needing her to understand the gravity of the situation. Something like that, but we have friends helping us, and Miss Elizabeth. Sophie considered this, then turned to Elizabeth. Are you scared too? Elizabeth knelt beside Jack, meeting Sophie's eyes. Yes, she admitted. But being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what's right, even when you're terrified. Sophie nodded, accepting this wisdom. Okay, can I bring my space book? Absolutely, Jack promised. As Sophie went to gather her things, Colonel Martinez approached. A tall man with silver hair and the erect posture of a lifetime soldier, he radiated calm authority. Reynolds, he nodded to Jack. Barbara filled me in. This is more than corporate espionage. If they're willing to run a reporter off the road. I know, Jack acknowledged grimly. My brother has a cabin in Wisconsin, off the grid. No one knows about it except family. Martinez handed Jack a set of keys. Take my truck. It's in the back lot. Untraceable. I can't ask you to get involved. You're not asking. I'm offering. Martinez's gaze flickered to Sophie, then back to Jack. She reminds me of my granddaughter. Same spirit. Elizabeth stepped forward. Thank you, Colonel. We won't forget this. Just get that recording to Morris at the FBI. He's expecting your call. He handed Barbara a piece of paper. This is his direct line. He's a good man. Thorough. As they prepared to leave, splitting into two vehicles, Marcus driving Elizabeth to the FBI office, Martinez's truck carrying Jack, Sophie, and Barbara to Wisconsin, Elizabeth pulled Jack aside. Be careful, she said softly. Keller's desperate now. Desperate men make mistakes, but they're also at their most dangerous. You too, he touched her face gently. This isn't how I imagined our first date would end. She smiled despite everything. Fleeing corporate assassins wasn't on my bingo card either. When this is over, she interrupted, we'll have all the time in the world to figure this out. You, me, Sophie, whatever this is. He nodded, then leaned in and kissed her quickly. For luck, he explained. We make our own luck, she replied, echoing what he'd once told her. As they parted ways, neither could shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. They were right. The storm that had drenched Chicago that morning had moved north by afternoon, following Jack's truck, as if chasing them specifically. Sophie dozed in the back seat, her spacebook clutched to her chest. Barbara sat shotgun periodically, checking her phone for updates from Marcus. Elizabeth made it to the FBI office, she reported. Agent Morris is reviewing the recording now. Jack nodded, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. They'd been driving for nearly 3 hours, the city far behind them, Wisconsin farmland, spreading out on either side. The rain made everything look soft and indistinct, like a watercolor bleeding at the edges. How much farther? He asked. Another hour, maybe less. Barbara glanced back at Sophie. She's holding up well. She's resilient, like her mother. They lapsed into comfortable silence, the only sounds the swish of wipers and the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Jack's mind kept returning to Elizabeth, her face as they'd parted, determined but vulnerable. He'd known her less than 2 weeks, yet it felt like a lifetime. Perhaps because in some cosmic way, their paths had been intersecting for decades without their knowledge. His phone, the burner Marcus had provided, buzzed with a text. Barbara checked it. It's from Elizabeth. FBI taking action. Arrest warrants being prepared for Keller and Bishop. Stay safe, we'll call when clear. Jack exhaled slowly. That's something, at least. It's more than something, Barbara corrected. It's everything. Once the FBI gets involved, even men like Keller and Bishop can't make it disappear. I hope you're right. They turned onto a narrower road, gravel now, instead of pavement, trees pressing in on both sides. The rain had intensified, making visibility poor. Jack slowed the truck, leaning forward, as if that might help him see better through the deluge. That's when he noticed the headlights behind them cutting through the gray curtain of rain. Moving fast. Too fast for these conditions. We've got company, he said quietly, not wanting to wake Sophie. Barbara turned, squinting through the rear window. Could be nothing. Local. Maybe. But Jack's instincts, honed by war and parenthood, screamed otherwise. He pressed the accelerator, putting distance between them and the approaching vehicle. The headlights surged forward, closing the gap with alarming speed. Definitely not local, Barbara muttered, reaching into her bag. To Jack's surprise, she pulled out a small handgun. Marine Corps taught me to always be prepared. Let's hope we don't need that, Jack said, though he was grateful for her foresight. The vehicle behind them was close enough now that Jack could make out its shape in the rearview mirror. A black SUV, same model favored by corporate security teams and government agencies alike. It pulled into the oncoming lane and accelerating to draw alongside them. Hold on, Jack warned, then swerved suddenly, forcing the SUV to either back off or go off-road. It chose the latter, tires spinning in mud before regaining traction. The maneuver bought them seconds, nothing more. The SUV was back this time, trying to force them off the road. Jack gripped the wheel tighter, using every evasive driving technique he'd learned in the military. Sophie stirred in the back seat. Daddy, why are we going so fast? Just a little rain race, sweetheart, he said, forcing his voice to remain calm. Nothing to worry about. But there was plenty to worry about. The SUV rammed them, the impact jarring them sideways. Sophie screamed. Barbara braced herself against the dashboard. Jack, she shouted, there's a turnoff ahead. Martinez's cabin is just down that road. He saw it, a nearly hidden drive cutting through the trees. If they could make it there, lose their pursuers in the dense forest. The SUV rammed them again, harder this time. The truck fishtailed, tires struggling for purchase on the rain-slick gravel. Jack fought the wheel, but physics was against them. They were going too fast, the road too wet. Time seemed to slow as the truck spun. Jack had one thought, Sophie, as they careened off the road, down an embankment and into the waiting darkness of the forest below. At the FBI field office in Chicago, Elizabeth paced the length of a conference room, unable to sit still. Agent Morris, a solid man with a methodical manner, watched her with patient eyes. Miss Morgan, I understand your concern, but these things take time. We're building a case that will stick. While you build your case, Jack and his daughter are out there, potentially in danger. We have no reason to believe. No reason, Elizabeth interrupted. Mercer was run off the road. Your agents found surveillance equipment in my penthouse. Keller and Bishop explicitly discussed handling Jack on that recording. Morris sighed. I'm not dismissing the threat, but we're doing everything by the book precisely so that Keller and Bishop can't wriggle out on a technicality. Elizabeth's phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. No word from Jack's truck. Signal lost near Woodstock, WI. Her blood ran cold. Something's wrong. Jack's not responding. Morris was immediately alert. When was last contact? About an hour ago, they were heading to a cabin in Wisconsin. He moved to the door, calling to agents in the outer office. I need a track on a cell signal and contact the Wisconsin State Police Woodstock area. Elizabeth watched as the office erupted into controlled chaos, agents moving with purpose, phones ringing. She felt simultaneously grateful for their response and terrified of what it might mean. We'll find them, Morris assured her, returning to her side. In the meantime, we have enough to move on Keller and Bishop. The warrants are signed. Teams are en route to Metanova and Morgan Tech now. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt hollow. What good was justice if it came at the cost of Jack and Sophie? I need to go there, she said, to Wisconsin, where they lost contact. Ms. Morgan, that's not advisable. I wasn't asking permission, she cut him off. I was stating a fact. Morris studied her, then nodded once. At least take an agent with you. Fine, but we leave now. As they prepared to depart, Elizabeth's phone rang. Frank Donovan. Elizabeth? Where are you? The board is in chaos. Keller's been arrested by the FBI right in the middle of the meeting. It's a long story, Frank, one I don't have time for right now. What's happening that the FDA has issued a Class 1 recall for NextGen. The stock is in free fall. Good, she said firmly. Better the company takes the hit than patients take the risk. Elizabeth, Frank, I have to go. Jack and Sophie are missing, possibly in danger. A pause, the waiter and his daughter Elizabeth. What have you gotten yourself into? The truth, Frank, and it's messy and dangerous and bigger than all of us. She took a breath. If I don't call you back in 24 hours, release everything in the secure folder on my private server. Password is Dahran991. You're scaring me. Good. Be scared. Be vigilant. And be ready to rebuild Metanova from the ashes if necessary. She hung up, turning to find Agent Morris watching her with newfound respect. You really are willing to burn it all down, aren't you? Some things matter more than companies, she said simply. Now, are we going to Wisconsin or not? The first thing Jack became aware of was the rain, still falling, pattering against metal and glass. Then pain, his head, his chest, his leg. Then memory crashing back with terrifying clarity. Sophie, he gasped, jerking upright only to be stopped by his seatbelt. The truck was tilted at a sickening angle, nose down in a ravine. Through the cracked windshield, he could see trees mud the gray curtain of rain. He turned to the passenger seat. Empty. Barbara was gone. The back door hung open, Sophie's seat vacant as well. Panic surged through him as he fumbled with his seatbelt. He had to find them, had to know they were safe. His leg protested as he moved, a sharp pain suggesting something was sprained or worse. He ignored it, forcing himself out of the truck and into the rain. Sophie, he called, voice hoarse. Barbara. No answer but the steady drum of rain on leaves. He climbed up the slope, mud sucking at his shoes, using tree roots and branches to pull himself forward. At the top, he found tire tracks in the soft ground the SUV had stopped. There were footprints, two leading into the forest. Jack followed, dragging his injured leg, every instinct screaming that he needed to move faster, find them sooner. The rain made tracking difficult, washing away signs almost as quickly as they were made. Then he heard it, Sophie's voice, high and frightened, coming from somewhere ahead. He moved toward the sound, no longer caring about stealth or caution. A clearing appeared through the trees. In it stood a small, dilapidated hunting cabin, not Martinez's, some other forgotten structure. And on the porch, illuminated by a single bare bulb, stood two men in dark suits. Between them, Sophie, her face tear-streaked, but chin raised defiantly. Of Barbara, there was no sign. Jack crouched behind a fallen tree, assessing the situation. Two men armed from the bulges under their jackets. Sophie apparently unharmed, but terrified. He needed a weapon, a distraction, anything. Come out, Reynolds, one of the men called. We know you survived the crash. Make this easy on yourself and the girl. Jack remained still, mind racing. If they knew he was alive, they were watching the perimeter, possibly more men in the trees. Direct confrontation would be suicide. 10 seconds, Reynolds, or things get unpleasant for your daughter. Sophie's voice small but clear. Don't come, Daddy. It's a trap. Jack's heart swelled with the pride, even as fear clawed at his throat. His brave, impossible girl. The man grabbed Sophie's arm roughly. Shut up, kid. That was a mistake. Jack had been weighing options, calculating risks. But seeing that man put hands on his daughter erased all thought of personal safety. He was moving before he made a conscious decision, bursting from cover, with a roar that belonged more to the battlefield than the Wisconsin woods. The element of surprise gave him seconds, precious, vital seconds. He tackled the first man before he could draw his weapon, driving him off the porch and into the mud. They went down hard, Jack's fury giving him strength his injured body shouldn't have possessed. The second man pulled his gun, but Sophie, incredible, resourceful Sophie, chose that moment to sink her teeth into his hand. He howled the weapon, discharging harmlessly into the air. Jack grappled with the first man, raining blows fueled by paternal rage. The man fought back, landing a punch to Jack's injured ribs that sent stars exploding across his vision. A gunshot cracked through the rain. Both men froze. Jack looked up, expecting to see the second man recovered and weapon trained on him, and instead he saw Barbara Thompson, blood streaming from a gash on her forehead, pistol held steady in a two-handed grip. Get away from him, she ordered. Now. The men hesitated, calculating odds that had suddenly shifted dramatically against them. Federal agents. Another voice bellowed from the trees. Drop your weapons! Hands where we can see them! A team of FBI agents emerged from the forest, weapons drawn. Behind them came Elizabeth, rain-soaked and wild-eyed, searching frantically until she spotted Jack and Sophie. The men surrendered, having no choice. As agents secured them, Elizabeth rushed forward, dropping to her knees beside Jack and Sophie, gathering them both in a fierce embrace. You're alive, she breathed. You're both alive. Sophie clung to them both, her small body trembling. Jack held them, his universe contracted to this single moment, this circle of arms. Barbara, he asked, looking up for their savior. I'm okay, she assured him, lowering her weapon as an agent took it from her carefully. Got thrown from the truck in the crash. Tracked these bastards here. Was waiting for the right moment when the cavalry arrived. Agent Morris approached, holstering his weapon. We've got Bishop in custody in Chicago. Keller too. Their security team is singing like canaries to save themselves. The next-gen recall, Elizabeth asked. Proceeding, the FDA has teams working with hospitals nationwide. Elizabeth nodded, relief evident in every line of her body. It's over then. The immediate danger, yes, Morris confirmed. There will be trials, testimony, a lot of legal proceedings. But the threat to your lives, that's over. Jack tightened his hold on Sophie, who had finally stopped shaking. Hear that, kiddo? The bad guys lost. Just like in your books. She looked up at him with eyes too wise for her years. But the good guys got hurt too. Sometimes that happens, he acknowledged. But we heal. We keep going. Together, she asked, looking from him to Elizabeth. Jack met Elizabeth's gaze over Sophie's head. In her eyes, he saw not the CEO, not the viral villain, but the woman who had risked everything for truth. For them. Together, Elizabeth promised, taking Sophie's hand in hers. If that's what you want. Sophie considered this with the gravity of a child making a lifelong decision. I think, she said finally, that would be acceptable. Despite everything, the pain, the fear, the rain still falling around them, Jack laughed. Elizabeth joined him, the sound rising into the clearing like a promise of clearer skies ahead. 1 month later, the ballroom of the Drake Hotel was once again filled with Chicago's elite. But this time the occasion was not a charity auction, but a press conference. Elizabeth Morgan, wearing not evening wear, but a simple blue suit, stood at the podium facing a sea of reporters. Today marks a new chapter for Medinova, she began. The events of the past month have been difficult and revealing. The criminal actions of Robert Keller and Arthur Bishop have shaken the foundation of the company I built. But foundations can be repaired, strengthened, made better than before. She paused, looking to the side of the stage where Jack stood with Sophie. Both smiled encouragement. Effective immediately, Medinova will transition to a public benefit corporation with 51% of profits dedicated to patient assistance programs for those who cannot afford life-saving medical devices. The remaining 49% will fund research and development of new technologies with enhanced safety protocols. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. This was not the typical corporate response to scandal. Furthermore, Elizabeth continued, I am establishing the Sarah Reynolds Foundation, named for a brilliant clinical consultant whose safety standards were ignored with tragic consequences. The foundation will provide oversight for medical device companies, ensuring that profit never again takes precedence over patient safety. Jack's eyes glistened. Sarah's legacy preserved in the most meaningful way possible. Finally, I am stepping down as CEO of Medinova. Gasps and exclamations filled the room. Cameras flashed furiously. My replacement will be Dr. Janet Phillips, our Chief Medical Officer, whose ethical stand during the next-gen crisis demonstrated the leadership this company needs. I will remain on the board focusing specifically on ethical compliance and patient advocacy. A reporter called out, Miss Morgan, what will you do now? Elizabeth smiled the kind of smile that reached her eyes in a way her public expressions never had before. I'm going to build something new, something that matters. After the press conference, as the crowd dispersed and the cameras finally stopped flashing, Jack approached Elizabeth. That was quite an exit. Not an exit, she corrected, a transformation. Sarah would be honored by the foundation. It's the least I could do. Her work saved lives, even if it took us too long to recognize it. Sophie tugged at Elizabeth's hand. Does this mean you'll have more time for pizza nights now? Elizabeth knelt to the child's level. It means I'll have more time for everything that matters, including pizza nights. Good, Sophie declared, because Daddy still burns the crust and we need supervision. Jack laughed, the sound echoing in the now empty ballroom. Out of the mouths of babes. Elizabeth rose, taking his hand. She's not wrong, you know. Your pizza skills are questionable at best. Then I guess you'll just have to stick around and show me how it's done. I guess I will, she agreed, leaning into him slightly. For a very long time. As they left the hotel, stepping into the bright Chicago sunshine, Elizabeth thought about the long, strange journey that had brought them here. From a viral confrontation to a cabin in the woods, from strangers to something far more profound. The waiter who stood his ground, the CEO who found her heart, and the little girl who reminded them both what truly mattered. It wasn't how any of them had expected their stories to unfold, but sometimes the most beautiful chapters are the ones we never saw coming. The ones that begin with a single moment of courage when someone refuses to serve anger and offers truth instead. And as they walked into the future they would build together, Elizabeth knew one thing with absolute certainty. She was no longer hungry for power or validation or success. For the first time in her life, she was truly completely full.